The morning sun cast long shadows across the alien landscape of Kepler 442b as Dr. Jake Morrison knelt beside a cluster of unusual purple flowers. He carefully pressed one specimen between the pages of his field notebook, humming quietly to himself. The xenobiologist had been studying the planet's plant life for 6 months now, and every day brought new discoveries. His small research camp sat on a hill overlooking a peaceful river valley, surrounded by towering trees with silver bark and leaves that shimmered like metal. In the breeze, Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and stood up, stretching his back. The gravity here was slightly lighter than Earth's, which made long days of fieldwork easier on his aging joints. At 42, he was no longer the young graduate student who had dreamed of exploring alien worlds, but his passion for xenobotany burned as bright as ever. He picked up his sample bag and walked toward the edge of the hill, planning to collect water samples from the river below. That's when he saw them. On the far side of the river, about 200 meters away, strange figures moved around what looked like the wreckage of a spacecraft. Jake pulled out his binoculars and focused on the scene. His breath caught in his throat. The beings were definitely not human. They stood roughly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shift color in the sunlight. Their heads were larger than human heads, with what appeared to be complex breathing apparatus covering their faces. Jake counted at least 12 of them. They moved with purpose around their damaged vessel, which looked like nothing he had ever seen before. The ship was sleek and curved, made of some kind of dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sections of it appeared to be partially phased out of normal reality, flickering in and out of existence like a bad television signal. He quickly activated his communication device and contacted the orbiting research station. "Amy, are you receiving?" "This?" he whispered into the microphone. Dr. Amy Foster's voice crackled back through the speaker. "Jake, what's your situation?" "Your bio readings just spiked. I've got visual contact with what appears to be a crashed alien vessel. Multiple non-human entities present. They seem to be stranded on the opposite side of the river from my position." There was a long pause before Amy responded. "Are you certain they're not some kind of indigenous life form we haven't cataloged yet?" Jake adjusted his binoculars and watched as one of the beings operated a device that projected a 3-dimensional hologram into the air. "Unless the local wildlife has developed advanced holographic technology, I'm pretty sure these are visitors. And they look like they're in trouble." The aliens had been there for hours, possibly days. Jake could see evidence of their attempts to cross the river. Strange metallic debris littered the shoreline, where they had apparently tried and failed to build some kind of bridge or transport system. Scorch marks on the ground suggested they had used energy weapons or tools, but to no apparent success. Jake moved to a better vantage point and continued observing. The aliens seemed highly agitated. Their movements were quick and jerky, and they appeared to be having heated discussions. One of them, who seemed to be in command based on the way the others deferred to it, pointed repeatedly across the river. Jake realized they were looking at something on his side of the water. Following their gaze, Jake spotted a metallic object partially buried in the sand about 50 meters downstream from his position. It was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a refrigerator, and it pulsed with a faint blue light. An emergency beacon, he realized. The aliens needed to reach it, but the river stood in their way. The river itself was not particularly intimidating by human standards. It was about 200 meters wide at this point, with a gentle current and clear water that revealed a sandy bottom. Jake estimated it was probably no more than chest deep in most places. Any reasonably fit human could wade across it without much difficulty, or swim it easily. But apparently, these advanced beings found it an insurmountable obstacle. Jake watched in fascination as the aliens deployed increasingly sophisticated equipment. One device appeared to manipulate gravity, creating a visible distortion in the air above the water. Another projected some kind of energy field that made the air shimmer like heat waves. Each attempt failed spectacularly. The gravity device caused a massive splash as it fell into the river and sank. The energy field flickered for a few moments before collapsing with a sound like breaking glass. The alien commander made what Jake interpreted as gestures of frustration. It kicked at the sand and seemed to be shouting at its subordinates. The other aliens moved around their equipment with increasing desperation, running diagnostics on devices that Jake couldn't begin to understand. Hours passed. Jake remained, hidden behind a cluster of rocks, documenting everything he observed. Amy periodically checked in from orbit, but there was little she could do except monitor the situation and prepare reports for Earth Command. The aliens continued their futile attempts to cross the river, each failure more spectacular than the last dot as the day wore on. Jake began to understand the scope of their dilemma. These beings possessed technology that could travel between stars, manipulate matter at the quantum level, and project energy fields that defied human understanding. Yet they were completely stumped by a simple river crossing. They seemed to have no concept of basic watercraft construction or even swimming. Jake realized that this was a species that had advanced so far technologically that they had skipped over fundamental problem-solving skills. They thought in terms of complex solutions involving advanced physics and exotic materials. The idea of using simple tools and basic engineering principles was apparently foreign to them. The sun began to set, painting the alien landscape in shades of orange and purple. The stranded beings showed no signs of giving up, but their movements had become more frantic. Jake could see them pointing at their equipment readings, and he suspected they were running low on power or resources. He made a decision that would change everything. Standing up from his hiding place, Jake waved his arms and called out across the water. "Hello, can you understand me?" The aliens froze. 12 alien faces turned toward him, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he had just announced his presence to beings whose intentions were completely unknown. But it was too late to hide now. He had committed himself to making contact. One of the aliens reached for a device and pointed it in Jake's direction. A moment later, a mechanical voice echoed across the water, speaking perfect English. "Primitive being, identify yourself and state your purpose." Jake took a deep breath and stepped into the most important conversation of his life. Jake's heart pounded as he stared across the water at the 12 alien beings who had now turned their full attention toward him. The mechanical voice that had spoken in perfect English came from a tall figure who appeared to be their leader. This alien stepped closer to the water's edge, its elongated form casting an odd shadow in the fading sunlight. "I am Dr. Jake Morrison," he called back, his voice carrying clearly across the river. "I'm a scientist from Earth, studying plant life on this planet. You seem to be having some trouble." The alien leader consulted a device that projected holographic symbols into the air above its hand. After a moment, it responded through the translator. "I am Commander Vixthil of the Zephyrian Deep Space Exploration Fleet. We require no assistance from primitive species. Return to your dwelling and do not interfere with our operations." Jake almost smiled at the dismissive tone. He had encountered plenty of arrogant academics during his career, and alien arrogance apparently sounded much the same. "I can see your emergency beacon from here," he said, pointing downstream. "You've been trying to reach it for hours. Maybe I can help." Another alien, slightly shorter than the commander, moved forward and began operating what looked like a scanning device. This one spoke with a different mechanical voice, higher in pitch. "Commander, the primitive displays no technological signatures. Its species barely achieved interplanetary travel according to our databases. It cannot possibly solve what our advanced methods cannot. That's Science Officer Killandra, Commander Vexthul announced, as if Jake should be impressed. She has 17 advanced degrees in quantum physics, dimensional mechanics, and exotic matter manipulation. If she cannot solve this obstacle, certainly no primitive being can. Jake watched as the science officer continued her scans, apparently trying to analyze him like a specimen. On his communication device, Amy's voice crackled through. "Jake, I'm picking up massive energy readings from those beings. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Maybe you should be careful about offering help." He kept his voice low as he responded. "Amy, they've been stuck here for hours trying to cross a simple river. I think there's something we can learn from each other here." Turning back toward the aliens, Jake raised his voice. "Commander Vexthul, with respect, sometimes the simplest problems require simple solutions. I can get you across this river in less than an hour." The commander made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, though it had an odd mechanical quality. "Impossible. We have calculated the precise molecular density of the water, analyzed its current patterns, and determined the exact gravitational coefficients required for transit. Without quantum phase manipulation or molecular restructuring technology, crossing this barrier defies all known physics." "Have you tried building a boat?" Jake asked. The question apparently confused the aliens. They gathered in a circle and began what seemed like an intense discussion in their own language. Their translator devices picked up fragments of their conversation, rendering it into English in bits and pieces. Jake heard phrases like primitive watercraft theory and pre-quantum transportation methods, and impossible without energy matrix stabilization. Science Officer Killandra finally broke away from the group and addressed Jake directly. "Explain this concept of boat. Our databases contain theoretical references to such devices, but they require advanced materials engineering and precision manufacturing capabilities." Jake scratched his head. These beings could travel between stars, but had never heard of basic boat construction. A boat is just something that floats on water and carries passengers. You can make one from almost anything that's lighter than water or can displace enough water to stay afloat. "Demonstrate," Commander Vexthul commanded. "Prove that your primitive methods can accomplish what our advanced technology cannot." Jake looked around his immediate area and began gathering materials. The aliens watched with obvious skepticism as he collected a few fallen branches, some long grass-like plants, and examined the large leaves from nearby trees. The biggest leaf he found was enormous, roughly 4 meters long and 2 meters wide, with a natural curve that reminded him of a canoe hull. "Amy," he said into his communicator, "are you recording this?" "Every second," came her reply. "The xenobiology department is going to love this footage. Primitive human shows advanced aliens how to cross a river." As Jake began his preparations, he noticed more aliens gathering at the water's edge. Word seemed to have spread through their group that the primitive human was attempting the impossible. A third alien approached, this one carrying what appeared to be sophisticated tools that hummed with energy. "I am Engineer Zal Korix," the new arrival announced through its translator. "I have designed quantum tunneling devices and dimensional gateway systems. I wish to observe your alleged solution to analyze its impossibility." Jake nodded politely. "You're welcome to watch. This might take a little while, though." He started by examining the giant leaf more carefully. Its surface was waxy and water-resistant, and the natural curvature was almost perfect for his purposes. The stem was thick and sturdy, providing natural reinforcement along what would become the keel of his makeshift vessel. The aliens began setting up monitoring equipment around the riverbank on their side. Jake could see energy beams scanning him and his materials, holographic displays showing incomprehensible data, and what looked like recording devices, capturing every movement he made. The primitive appears to be selecting random organic debris. Science Officer Killandra announced to her colleagues. There is no logical pattern to his choices. Jake chuckled as he tested the flexibility of some vine-like plants. There's plenty of logic to it. You just have to think differently. Commander Vex Thule activated what appeared to be a communications array. I am reporting this incident to the Zephyrian Science Council. They will want to study this impossible claim that primitive organic materials can solve advanced transportation problems. You might want to wait until you see if it works first, Jake suggested as he began laying out his materials in a specific pattern. The sun was getting lower in the sky, but Jake had plenty of light to work with. The aliens' monitoring equipment was actually quite helpful, as their scanning beams illuminated his work area better than any flashlight could have got. As Jake began the actual construction process, he explained his reasoning to his alien audience. The key is understanding that you don't need complex technology for every problem. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one that works. Engineer Zal Korix aimed several devices at Jake's leaf and announced, preliminary scans show no energy signatures, no molecular bonding agents, and no structural enhancement fields. This approach cannot possibly succeed. Jake smiled as he started weaving the vines through holes he had carefully made in the leaf. We'll see about that. Jake carefully positioned the massive leaf on a flat section of the riverbank, making sure the natural curve faced upward like a shallow bowl. The aliens watched from across the water as he began working with methodical precision. Their scanning devices hummed constantly, bathing his work area in various colored lights as they tried to understand what he was doing. The primitive is manipulating the organic matter without any molecular bonding technology, Science Officer Killandra announced to her colleagues. This approach violates basic engineering principles. Jake ignored the commentary and focused on his task. He had built canoes before during his younger days camping in the Canadian wilderness, though never from materials quite like these. The leaf was incredibly strong despite its flexibility, with a waxy coating that would naturally repel water. He ran his hands along its surface, feeling for weak spots or tears that might cause problems later. Commander Vexthil activated another device that projected his voice across the water. Human Morrison, your primitive methods cannot possibly create a functional watercraft. We have spent considerable time analyzing this obstacle using advanced quantum calculations. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways, Jake replied as he began gathering the branches he had selected. Each piece was roughly the same length and thickness, chosen specifically to serve as ribs for his improvised vessel. You just have to work with what nature gives you, instead of trying to force it to do something unnatural. Engineer Zal Korix moved closer to the water's edge, holding what appeared to be a molecular scanner. The organic materials display no structural enhancement whatsoever. Their tensile strength is insufficient for load-bearing applications. Jake started placing the first branch across the width of the leaf, about 2 feet from what would become the bow. He carefully made small punctures in the leaf using his pocket knife, then threaded the vine-like plants through the holes to secure the branch in place. The alien's scanning beams immediately focused on these connection points. Fascinating, Kalandra muttered, though her translator made it sound more confused than impressed. The primitive is creating mechanical bonds without any adhesive compounds or fusion welding. As Jake worked, more aliens gathered on the opposite shore. Word had apparently spread through their entire crew that something unprecedented was happening. They set up additional monitoring equipment and what looked like recording devices, turning his simple boat-building project into a major scientific observation. Jake positioned the second branch parallel to the first, spacing it evenly along the leaf's length. The natural flexibility of the organic material worked in his favor, conforming to the shape he needed while maintaining its structural integrity. He wove the vines through more holes, creating a crisscross pattern that distributed stress evenly across the framework. The binding method appears to be strengthening as the primitive continues. Engineer Zalcorix reported with obvious bewilderment. This contradicts our understanding of material science. Amy's voice crackled through Jake's communicator. Jake, I'm monitoring their communications. They're completely baffled by what you're doing. Apparently, their species never developed this kind of hands-on engineering. Jake nodded as he continued working. It was becoming clear that the Zephyrians had jumped straight from primitive tools to advanced technology without learning the intermediate steps. They understood quantum physics, but had never learned basic craftsmanship. They could manipulate matter at the atomic level, but couldn't tie a simple knot. The third branch went into place with practiced ease. Jake was getting into a rhythm now, his hands working automatically, while his mind planned the next steps. He would need to reinforce the stern and bow sections, create some kind of paddle, and test the waterproofing before attempting to launch. His vessel. Commander, one of the other aliens called out, the primitive's construction is exhibiting structural coherence that our models did not predict. Commander Vexthul moved to examine the readouts from their monitoring equipment. Impossible. There are no energy fields, no quantum stabilization matrices, no molecular bonding agents. Yet the scans indicate increasing structural integrity. Jake smiled as he worked on the fourth branch. It's called understanding your materials. This leaf evolved to be flexible but strong. The vines evolved to bind things together when they get wet. I'm just using them the way nature intended. The aliens began what sounded like a heated discussion in their own language. Their translators caught fragments of the conversation, rendering phrases like primitive engineering paradox and impossible structural dynamics and recommendation for immediate study protocols. Jake moved to the bow section of his canoe and began shaping it more carefully. He folded the edges of the leaf inward, creating a pointed front that would cut through the water efficiently. More vines secured this configuration, and he took extra time to make sure the connections were tight and evenly distributed. The primitive is demonstrating intuitive understanding of hydrodynamic principles, Kilandra observed. Yet it displays no knowledge of fluid dynamics mathematics or quantum flow calculations. I don't need to calculate water flow, Jake called back. I just need to understand how water behaves. Any human who's ever been in a bathtub knows that pointed things move through water easier than flat things. Engineer Zalcorix aimed multiple scanning devices at the bow section. The structural modifications are improving the craft's theoretical performance characteristics. This should not be possible using such primitive techniques. Jake started working on the stern, repeating the same folding and binding process he had used on the bow. The sun was getting lower, but he still had plenty of working light. The aliens' monitoring equipment actually made the job easier by providing illumination from multiple angles as he secured the final vines at the stern. Jake noticed something interesting happening. The plant fibers were beginning to tighten as they absorbed moisture from the air. What had started as loose bindings were becoming increasingly secure without any effort on his part. Remarkable, Engineer Zalcorix announced. The binding materials are exhibiting self-tightening properties when exposed to atmospheric moisture. This creates an automatically adjusting structural system. Jake nodded with satisfaction. That's exactly what I was hoping for. When this thing hits the water, those vines are going to get even tighter. The wetter they get, the stronger the boat becomes. The aliens fell silent for several minutes, apparently processing this concept. Finally, Commander Vexthul spoke. You are claiming that your primitive construction will actually improve its performance when exposed to the very element it is designed to traverse? That's the idea, Jake replied, as he began testing the flexibility and strength of his completed framework. Sometimes working with nature is smarter than working against it. Science Officer Kilendra turned to address her colleagues. We must document every aspect of this process. The primitive is demonstrating engineering principles that contradict our fundamental assumptions about technology development. Jake stepped back to examine his work so far. The basic structure was complete and looked seaworthy. Now he needed to make a paddle and prepare for the most important test of all. Jake picked up a broad piece of bark that had fallen from one of the silver trees and examined it carefully. The bark was flat, lightweight, and had a good grip surface on one side. It would make a perfect paddle for his improvised canoe. He used his pocket knife to trim the edges and create a more efficient shape, then tested its weight and balance in his hands. The aliens watched every movement with intense fascination. Their monitoring equipment had tripled since he began construction, and now the entire Zephyrian crew stood at the water's edge. Jake could see them pointing their scanning devices at his bark paddle, apparently unable to comprehend how such a simple tool could be functional. The primitive has created what appears to be a manual propulsion device, Engineer Zalcorix announced to his colleagues. However, the efficiency calculations for such a crude mechanism indicate it cannot provide adequate thrust for water navigation. Jake tested the flexibility of his completed canoe by pressing down gently on different sections. The leaf hull gave slightly under pressure, but sprang back to its original shape immediately. The vine bindings had tightened even more as the evening. Air became more humid, creating what felt like a solid, reliable structure. Commander Vexthul activated his communication device again. Human Morrison, we have observed your construction process with great interest. However, our scientific analysis indicates that your primitive vessel cannot possibly function as intended. The mathematical probabilities are simply too low. There's only one way to find out, Jake replied as he carefully lifted his canoe and carried it toward the water's edge. The vessel was surprisingly light despite its size, and the natural balance of the leaf made it easy to handle. Sometimes you have to test things in the real world instead of just running calculations. Science Officer Kilendra aimed several scanning devices at the approaching canoe. Commander, the primitive is actually attempting to launch its construction. This could result in catastrophic failure and possible injury to the specimen. Amy's voice came through Jake's communicator with obvious excitement. Jake, I'm recording everything from orbit. The xenobiology team is going to study this footage for years. You're about to make first contact history. Jake waded into the shallow water at the river's edge, feeling the cool liquid flow around his boots. The sandy bottom provided good footing, and he was pleased to see that the current was even gentler than he had estimated. He positioned his canoe carefully on the water's surface and held it steady while he prepared to climb in. The moment the leaf hull touched the water, something remarkable happened. The vines that bound the framework began to swell and tighten even more, creating an increasingly rigid structure. The waxy surface of the leaf repelled water perfectly, and the natural curve of the hull settled into the river like it had been designed specifically for this purpose. Impossible, Engineer Zalcorix muttered, his voice carrying clearly across the water through the translator. The craft is achieving neutral buoyancy, despite having no ballast systems or stability matrices. Jake carefully placed one foot in the center of his canoe, testing its stability. The vessel rocked slightly, but remained steady and secure. He shifted his weight gradually, allowing the craft to adjust to his presence before committing fully. Then, with practiced ease, he stepped completely into the canoe and settled into a comfortable sitting position. The aliens fell completely silent. Even their monitoring equipments seemed to quiet down as every Zephyrian focused on what they were witnessing. Jake sat motionless for a moment, letting his improvised vessel find its natural balance on the water. The canoe floated perfectly, sitting high and dry, with plenty of freeboard to spare. The primitive and its construction are achieving stable flotation, Science Officer Kilandra announced in a voice that suggested she was having difficulty accepting what her instruments were telling her. Structural integrity remains at optimal levels despite complete submersion in the aquatic medium. Jake picked up his bark paddle and dipped it into the water, testing the feel of the current against the blade. The balance was good, and the broad surface provided excellent purchase against the water. He took a few experimental strokes, moving the canoe in a slow circle to demonstrate its maneuverability. Commander Vexthal stepped closer to the water's edge, his elongated form casting a strange shadow in the fading light. This defies every principle of our advanced engineering sciences. How is your primitive construction achieving what our quantum-enhanced transportation systems cannot? It's not defying anything, Jake replied as he paddled in another circle, showing off the canoe's responsiveness. It's just working with natural laws instead of trying to overcome them. Water supports things that are less dense than it is. The shape matters more than the materials. Jake began paddling steadily across the river, heading directly toward the stranded aliens. The canoe moved smoothly through the water, cutting a clean wake as it progressed. The leaf hull performed flawlessly, maintaining its shape and waterproof seal despite the stresses of navigation. Engineer Salcorix ran multiple scans on the moving vessel. The craft is demonstrating remarkable hydrodynamic efficiency. The primitives paddling technique is generating optimal thrust with minimal energy expenditure. As Jake approached the halfway point of his crossing, he could see the aliens more clearly. Their faces, while alien in structure, showed expressions that he interpreted as amazement and confusion. Several of them were taking readings with handheld devices, while others appeared to be recording everything for later analysis. "Amy, are you getting all this?" Jake asked into his communicator without breaking his paddling rhythm. "Every second of it," came her reply. "Jake, you've just demonstrated practical engineering to a species that forgot how to build things with their hands. This is going to change how we understand technological development." The canoe continued its steady progress across the river. Jake had to admit he was enjoying himself, despite the serious nature of the situation. There was something deeply satisfying about solving a complex problem with simple tools and basic knowledge. The feel of the paddle cutting through water, the gentle rocking of his improvised vessel, and the knowledge that he was accomplishing something his alien observers considered impossible combined to create a perfect moment. Science Officer Kilandra turned to address Commander Vexthal. "Sir, we must request immediate consultation with our theoretical physics department. This primitive demonstration is challenging fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technological advancement and problem-solving capability." Was now 3/4 of the way across the river, and his destination was clearly in sight. The emergency beacon pulsed its blue light from the shoreline, no longer an unreachable goal, but simply the end point of a pleasant boat ride. "Human Morrison," Commander Vexthal called across the diminishing distance, "we acknowledge that your primitive methods have achieved unexpected success. We formally request transport assistance." Jake smiled as he guided his leaf canoe toward the alien shore, preparing to make the most unusual pickup of his career. Jake guided his leaf canoe smoothly to the alien shoreline, feeling the sandy bottom scrape gently against the hull as he reached shallow water. The Zephyrians stepped back as he approached, their tall forms creating an imposing circle around the water's edge. Up close, Jake could see details of their appearance that had been hidden by distance. Their skin had a metallic sheen that shifted from silver to blue in the fading sunlight, and their large eyes seemed to take in everything. With scientific precision, Commander Vexthal moved forward first, his breathing apparatus making soft mechanical sounds as he examined Jake's vessel. "Human Morrison, Your primitive construction has achieved what our advanced technology could not. We formally request passage to our emergency beacon." Jake stepped out of his canoe and pulled it partially onto the beach to keep it stable. "I can take one passenger at a time. The canoe is strong, but it's not built for heavy loads. Who wants to go first?" The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Science Officer Kilandra aimed her scanning device at the canoe again, apparently still trying to understand how it functioned. "Commander, our safety protocols require that we analyze the transport method before risking crew members." "We've analyzed it for hours," Engineer Zalcorix pointed out. "Every scan indicates the primitive's vessel should not work, yet it clearly does. Perhaps our protocols need updating." Commander Vexthal stepped closer to the canoe, his elongated form towering over Jake. "I will go first. As commander, it is my responsibility to test unknown transportation methods before exposing my crew to potential danger." Jake helped position the alien leader in the center of the canoe. Vexthal was surprisingly light despite his height, and his limbs folded in ways that human joints could never manage. The alien settled into the vessel with obvious nervousness, gripping the sides with hands that had too many fingers. "This is highly irregular," Vexthal muttered as Jake pushed off from the shore. "Zephyrian transportation has always involved precise energy calculations and quantum stabilization fields. I have never experienced such primitive locomotion methods." Jake began paddling back across the river, maintaining a steady rhythm that kept the canoe moving smoothly through the water. "How does it feel? Different from your usual transportation?" Vexthal was quiet for several moments, apparently processing new sensations. "The vessel moves in harmony with the water, rather than imposing its will upon the environment. This is contrary to all our engineering principles, yet it is remarkably effective." As they crossed the river, Jake noticed the alien commander gradually relaxing. Vexthal's grip on the canoe sides loosened, and he began to observe their surroundings with obvious curiosity rather than fear. The gentle rocking motion of the vessel seemed to have a calming effect that sophisticated Zephyrian technology apparently could not provide. "Human Morrison," Vexthal said as they neared the opposite shore, "your species has retained knowledge that mine abandoned long ago. We advanced so rapidly through technological development that we never learned these fundamental skills." Jake guided the canoe to his original launch point and helped the alien commander step onto dry land. Vexthal moved carefully, as if his experience in the primitive vessel had changed his perspective on locomotion itself. He spent several minutes examining the emergency beacon while Jake paddled back for the next passenger. Science Officer Kilandra was waiting at the water's edge when Jake returned. She climbed into the canoe with obvious fascination, immediately pulling out handheld devices to scan the hull from the inside. "I must document the experience from a passenger perspective. Our theoretical physics department will require detailed sensory data." During the crossing, Kilandra peppered Jake with questions about materials science, structural engineering, and primitive construction techniques. She seemed particularly amazed by the concept of working with natural properties rather than overriding them with technology. "Your species understands intuitive physics in ways that ours has forgotten," she observed as Jake paddled steadily across the river. "We can manipulate quantum fields and restructure matter at the atomic level, but we cannot tie knots or understand why curved surfaces move through water more efficiently than flat ones." The crossing continued with Jake ferrying aliens one at a time. Each passenger reacted differently to the experience. Engineer Zalcorix spent the entire trip trying to reverse engineer the canoe's construction principles. Another alien, who introduced himself as Navigator Vexthal, seemed to find the gentle motion of the water deeply relaxing after months of high-stress space travel. As the sun set completely, Jake's canoe was illuminated by the aliens' monitoring. equipment, and the pulsing light from their emergency beacon. The work was becoming routine, but each crossing provided new insights into the cultural differences between humans and Zephyr. I and S. Dr. Amy. Foster's voice crackled through Jake's communicator during his 8th trip across the river. Jake, I'm monitoring communications from their ship. They're already discussing changes to their educational systems based on what they've learned from you today. By the time Jake transported the final alien crew member, a complete transformation had occurred in the Zephyrians' attitude toward human capabilities. They no longer referred to him as a primitive being, and their scientific discussions focused on understanding rather than dismissing his methods. Vexthul activated their emergency beacon successfully, sending a signal to their rescue fleet. As they waited for pickup, the aliens gathered around Jake's canoe with genuine scientific curiosity rather than condescending skepticism. Human Morrison, Vexthul announced formally, the Zephyrian Science Council wishes to establish cultural exchange protocols with your species. We have much to learn from each other. Science Officer Kilendra stepped forward with what appeared to be a recording device. We propose that you teach practical engineering methods to our students while we share our advanced scientific knowledge with your researchers. Your demonstration today has revealed critical gaps in our educational development. Jake smiled as he looked at his simple leaf canoe, now the center of attention for beings who could travel between stars. I think that sounds like a great idea. Maybe you can teach us about quantum physics while we show you how to build things with your hands. Engineer Zal Korix carefully examined the vine bindings one more time. Perhaps true technological advancement is not about the complexity of one's tools, but about the ability to solve problems efficiently, regardless of available resources. 3 hours later, when the Zephyrian rescue ship arrived, Jake's Leaf canoe was carefully loaded aboard for transport to their home world. Commander Vexthul explained that it would be displayed in their most prestigious science museum as an example of elegant engineering solutions. Amy finally joined Jake on the planet's surface as the aliens prepared to depart. She found him sitting by the river, already sketching plans for improved canoe designs in his field notebook. So what did you learn today? She asked as they watched the alien ship disappear into the night sky. Jake looked up from his sketches and smiled. I learned that sometimes the most advanced beings in the universe just need someone to show them how to tie a knot. The emergency beacon continued to pulse softly in the darkness, but now it served as a reminder of successful cooperation rather than desperate isolation. Jake and Amy sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle flow of the river that had brought two species together through the simple act of building a boat from a leaf.